Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in just a couple seconds, so find a seat that speaks to you. Good thing we're on a delay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to City Club of Eugene's September 29th, 2023 Forum on Threats to Oregonians' Civil Liberties. My name's Andrew Calick, and I am City Club's president. Today, City Club comes to you live from the 5th Street Market District in the heart of downtown Eugene, and it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us in person, online, or over the radio. For 3 decades, the City Club of Eugene has remained dedicated to its founding mission, to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, to learn something new, to take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so I want to send a special thank you this afternoon to our Platinum Community and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. The AARP of Oregon is a trusted and positive force for social change, using the experience and leadership of volunteer members to benefit all Oregonians as we age. More information at states.aarp.org/Oregon. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a long-time listener, I talked to somebody in Coos County this week who has listened for 30 years, which is awesome. I invite you to support our work by becoming an individual member, a business or community sponsor, or to suggest an idea for an upcoming program. You can do all those things and more at cityclubofeugene.org. Your support and engagement make these community conversations possible. And as we say every week, City Club is not just about conversation, it's about taking that conversation and translating it into action. And it is our hope that with informed understanding, you'll engage in the issues impacting our community, including threats to some of our most cherished civil rights and liberties. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I'm wearing my Article 1 of the Constitution tie. I don't have many excuses to do that, so thank you to our coordinator, Joel Corrin, for putting together today's program, and I'll turn the mic over to Joel.
Unfortunately, I don't have a tie for any of the amendments. I always like it when a program that we plan months ahead becomes a major topic of conversation in the newspapers and among people around the day of the program. I'm one of those Neanderthals that still gets a paper every morning. Unfortunately, it's the Register Guard, but that's another story. On Tuesday of this week, there was an article with the headline, "Libraries Report Record Number of Books Being Challenged." On Thursday of this week, yesterday, There was an article, Montana ban on gender care for minors blocked, with a cutout. At least 22 states have enacted bans on gender-affirming medical care for minors. Some bans have been temporarily blocked, others have taken effect. We live in a blue state. We feel safe here in Oregon. We've got, but are we? Are we safe? Are there challenges? There are challenges nationwide, as you will hear, but there are challenges here also, here in Eugene, here in Oregon. And many people are worried that the residents of those states put up with restrictive laws pertaining to things like health care, LGBTQ rights, trans rights, teaching U.S. history, books on library shelves, and efforts to restrict people's ability to vote, to name a few. Red states only? This is where these restrictive laws are in effect. In Oregon, it could never occur here, right? Maybe we should not be so sure. Today we will hear from our speakers who know what's happening. Today we welcome Angela O'Connor, Eugene Public Library Acting Director, Bethany Grace Howe, PhD, a communications specialist for the state of Oregon's Department of Human Services, as well as a plane-hopping communications consultant and stand-up comedian. And Garrett Epps, professor of practice at the University of Oregon Law School. Professor Epps will start it off, followed by Bethany, and then Angela. Garrett?
Thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks for the invitation, and everybody, thanks for coming out on a fairly unpleasant rainy day to hear this. Even though I'm a law professor, I'm going to try to keep my remarks brief because I think there's much more to learn from people who are dealing with these issues in the field. But I do want to set a little bit, put a frame around what we're going to talk today, because we tend to think of civil liberties as the individual facing the power of the state and saying, I can say what I want, I can vote as I please. And in that respect, we are in pretty good position right now. In Oregon, we can be pretty much sure that the state government is not going to enact a ban on trans health care or something similar. And we have a friendly administration in Washington that is not going to come after us with FBI agents and so forth. But the larger picture is somewhat disturbing because civil liberties has two aspects. And one of them, obviously, is the right against central authority, but the other is something we take for granted, and that is just the right to be in a public space, the right to express ourselves, the right to fly a flag, the right to speak to our neighbors. And that right is decaying around the country. This is not peculiar to Oregon, but it's also not peculiar to red states. I just finished, coincidentally, a very long study of the comparisons between the time we're living in and the years after the Civil War in my native South. And that was what historians call, in a sense, a state of unwar. The troops went home, but the conflict continued on the ground with a great deal of political violence and contesting for power. And if you think about the time we are living in now, we have just completed the longest war in the history of the United States. 20-year war, it's very hard to see how that could take place without corroding our democratic ideas. And remember, like the Civil War, this was a war against an internal enemy, and it was a war against an enemy we couldn't identify. And naturally, it began to turn people's eyes toward their neighbors and make them wonder if they are the problem. And I think that with that background, we can see that we may be in a period of what the historian Stephen Hahn called paramilitary politics, where the political struggle is carried on not simply at the ballot box or in public debate, but in contests of force on the ground. And I will start just by telling you things that have happened to me since I began my move back to Oregon 4 years ago. And these are the following. I and 4 of my grandchildren found ourselves locked in to the OMSI Museum in Portland for 2 hours because the Portland police decided to allow neo-Nazis to lead a march past the museum without any warning to anyone. I don't think the kids knew what was going on. It's a great museum if you haven't been there, but I sure did. That same month, I had hoped to take these kids, grandkids who live elsewhere, to what I think is one of the great adornments of life in Eugene, and that is the Saturday market. I thought kids would love that. But as it happened, a God and Guns group decided they would have an armed march across the street from the Saturday market on that day, and so my kids and I didn't get to go there. I live near a very small park, not central to Eugene or anything else, but twice now since I've lived here, I've been in the park when it was invaded by masked men with assault rifles who came to provide security for political events. We all know the newsworthy events that have happened, the Black Lives Matter demonstration in Springfield, which is still the subject of ongoing litigation, an armed mob breaching the Oregon State Capitol as a kind of rehearsal for January 6th. And the most disturbing thing to me is that OPB has produced a report that the Oath Keepers and other paramilitary organizations are having some success recruiting or infiltrating law enforcement with their members and sympathizers, so that local law enforcement might not, in the end, be playing the level game. And that, again, is something that has some connection to the years after Reconstruction. So the right to take part in our government and the right to take part in our lives is being challenged by people who want to control public space. And we're all aware that we now live in an extremely heavily armed society. And I can assure you, it's not a big difference in how I feel about a walk in the park, but it is a difference. I am aware that this could happen without warning again. And the more this happens, the more that becomes corroded, the more public spaces are degraded. And it's very hard to combat this kind of thing. I will say that I was somewhat disheartened at a City Club meeting a few months ago when I asked the supervisory FBI agent who's in charge of monitoring extremism and hate what the FBI was doing to monitor, just to keep track of, infiltration of extremists into law enforcement. And he said, oh, nothing. We don't monitor people's opinions. I was in the 60s. I know the FBI monitors people's opinions. But anyway, the point is not that Oregon is particularly bad, but the point is we need to defend this civil liberty on the ground. And I think it behooves us all, and I say this much against my own inclination, to get out and go to these civic events, to be at the school board meetings, to be at the city council meetings and the candidate forums and the city club forums, just to make sure that that space stays available to us. You know, we are thinking things are okay, they're not that bad, but imagine what would happen in this state if we get if the wind from Washington changes again. You know, having been standing in front of, I've been standing in front of the courthouse, the Mark Hatfield courthouse in Portland during the period when armed federal agents were grabbing people off the street. There's a lot that a hostile administration could do to blue states if it chose to. I want to tell people, you know, Cherish your right to participate. Cherish your right to walk in the park. These are important rights too. And I want to finish by reading a quote from Justice William O. Douglas, our own Pacific Northwest justice, who warned a young lawyer at the end of his life, "As nightfall does not come at once, neither does oppression. In both instances, there is a twilight when everything remains seemingly unchanged. And it is in such twilight that we must all be most aware of change around us, however slight, lest we become unwitting victims of the darkness." Thank you.
That works for me. All right. Well, gosh, this is a fun topic to be funny about. Or not so much. First, I did want to apologize for wearing orange. It is actually National Orange Shirt Day, where we recognize and remember the abuses of the Native American school system. And so I wanted to honor that, although wearing beaver colors is always very difficult for me. I kind of wanted to take off kind of from where he left off, and kind of this idea of where are we in terms of like as individuals. And yeah, it's a blue state, but I was up in Salem a few months ago, and I was at a food cart hanging out with some friends of mine, and somebody, she had to leave early, and so all of a sudden I get a text, and she's like, "You may want to get out of there," and I'm like, "Why? My beer is not empty. Why would I do that?" And she basically said a bunch of motorcycles are rolling up in the parking lot, and they are flashing their signs and waving their gear, and I'm not telling you have to leave, but if you want some company as you walk to your car, I'm happy to stay. And I did. I went, and it angered me that I had to go. Blending in, not my thing. You know, I do drive a red convertible, and I put the top down as I left the parking lot. I cranked Lady Gaga, so, you know, I got that. But the fact that I have friends that are worried about my safety says something. And I think, again, we think about Oregon as kind of a safe place. And so as I don't know, as a PhD, as a journalist, I'm not loath to have feelings or opinions. I just want to make sure they're actually based in some kind of reality. So I did a little digging, and the state of Oregon has a bias report hotline, like an incident line. And reported incidents of gender identity bias are up 639% since 2020. Anti-sexual orientation bias is up 430%. Now, does that mean that number of incidents is actually increasing in that amount? We don't know, because there's also increased awareness of it. So is it that more things are happening? Is it more people are reporting? It's probably some of both. By county, Lane is up 70%. But, I mean, this is a very strange Olympics. We're doing better than Marion County, which is up 300%, Deschutes County, which is up 500%, and Douglas, which is up 1,200%. And, you know, again, it's, what do numbers mean? In Lane County, that's approximately 0.5 reports per 1,000 people. In Multnomah County, that's slightly under 1 per 1,000. Marion, that's like 1.3 per 1,000. Douglas County, it's 1.8 per 1,000. So even though those percentages are grotesquely high, the truth of it is, and I put only in quotes, but Douglas County is only 4 times as bad as we are. The interesting thing is that I was trying to kind of isolate where Lane County and Eugene lie in the country in terms of these things. And again, because reporting methods are completely different in different states, and as near as I can tell, Oregon is one of the few states, if not the only one, that tracks and has citizens report these types of incidents in the way we do. So again, comparing numbers from one state to another is pretty much impossible. But even the FBI, with the statistics they keep, and yeah, they know. Single bias incidents from 20 to 21, up 30%. Victims, 12.5% increase. Sexual orientation actually went down 20%, while percentage of victims targeted for their gender identity went up about 20%. So maybe they're just now capable of saying, oh, you're trans, you're not gay, cool. I'll harass you for that. I don't know. I think we all, I wouldn't say we all, but, there have been some very high-profile incidents here in Oregon, and, statewide, you had a Republican nominee for governor, or one of the guys who was running for the Republican nomination, talking about, protecting girls' sports and, essentially saying, I don't want transgender kids with my kids. The Greater Idaho movement, where they want to, as near as I can tell, take 3/4 of Oregon and move it to Idaho. That's got a real element of what you might call bias embedded in it. And so as a state, yeah, these things, obviously Stan Pulliam did not get nominated. Oregon is not going to lose 3/4 of its real estate, but it is still out there, and it's part of what you mentioned. It's part of that climate where things that used to, it was like people had the common sense and the decency to know that those were abhorrent ideas and don't say those things. No, not anymore. And then, you look around Eugene and, in Crook County, conservative activists basically managed to get the Bible used as a means of disciplining students in Crook, and that was in Crook County. Their libraries wanted to move all of the LGBTQ books into a separate section. Got to admit, I find that ironic. Now they're easier to find. Have they not been to Powell's? Whatever. In Dallas, parents sued the Dallas School District because they did not want a transgender child being able to use the restroom in the locker room with their kids. They lost. In Salem Kaiser, parents wanted to remove a book called Genderqueer, a Memoir, which is a graphic novel. Here, closer to home, the 4th of July parade in 2021 was organized by the Proud Boys, which is a known hate group. And it was remarkable to me how many people were just pretty blasé about participating. They were like, well, that's not what I'm here for. I'm just here because it's a July 4th parade, and, well, we've missed it because of COVID, and somebody threw one, and we wanted to come. And it's just like, all right, so if the Klan hold a barbecue in the neighborhood, are you bringing the sheets? I don't know. And then, of course, here in Eugene at Old Nick's Pub, drag queen story time turned into just a public spectacle, again, of protesters, counter-protesters. And again, it's not that these things imprint themselves on our laws, our legislation, but the fact that, as a transgender person who's highly publicly visible, I do sometimes think twice about where I go and the choices I make. And again, I can, rationalize that and be like, well, it's not as bad as being in Tennessee. It's not as bad as being in Florida. But there is a point where, it's like global warming in a way. It's like, well, I don't know that storm was because of global warming, but at some point you do need to acknowledge that your house is underwater. And that's sometimes how I feel. And then the other thing, and I guess this is kind of a challenge, is one of the things that I mentioned before was that Stan Pulliam, made it part of his platform. And Betsy Johnson, certainly, I don't know that she was as vocal about it, but she embedded it in hers, and so did some of the other GOP candidates. And that is this, what they call protecting girls' sports and that kind of thing. And it's an interesting topic to me, because even among people that are what I would consider my strongest allies, the people that support me the most, if you ask them, they'll be like, I'm with you all the way up until that, and I don't think that's right. And in fact, 61% of the people in Oregon say they don't think transgender athletes should be allowed to participate outside of the assigned sex from their birth. Now, again, nobody seems to really care that girls that transition to boys, so, But, here's the thing, is that, first of all, in Oregon, the organization that kind of runs high school athletics in this state is very clear that transgender athletes have the right to participate in the identity of their choice. Done. There is no litmus test. But one of the things that I hear about a lot is fairness. And, I'm not pretending that there's not an anatomical difference between men and women. If there wasn't, my insurance bill wouldn't be so high. But the reality of it is that if we're really concerned about fairness, the simple truth is that what has more of an impact on girls' performance in sports and kids' ability to participate fairly in sports, has a stronger correlation with it, is that they come from poor families or rich ones. Kids that come from wealthy families have better facilities, they have better coaches, they have better gear, and we know these things make a difference. We know that they spend more money on boys' sports than they do girls' sports in this country, even though that's not legal. 1 minute. And so, what I would suggest to you is this. I guess what I would ask you is this. As you ponder kind of where you fit into this as an Oregonian, and you hear these issues discussed, I'm not saying you need to walk around being an advocate, but be aware. And one of the things, I guess the last thing that I kind of tell people when it comes to this is, if you look at the Constitution of the Oregon State Athletic Association, if you look at the reason for why kids participate in sports, nowhere in the guidebook for the state of Oregon does it say that the purpose of high school sports is to determine a winner, to determine a loser, who's faster, who's stronger. It is to enrich the educational and personal environment of every student in Oregon. And when you tell a kid they cannot participate, they cannot do what will make them a better, more complete human being, because it's more important that somebody not get second place, that's a violation of the very principles on which high school sports were founded. Those are the things that, as you go about your daily life, I would encourage you to think about and to be part of a solution as opposed to maybe sometimes being silent. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that, Bethany. I am Angela Okanya. I use she, her pronouns. I'm your acting library director for the Eugene Public Library. I also sit on the executive table of the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable with the American Library Association. And I wanted to start there. I want to take us on a broad national look at books, book challenges, and then I want to drill down to Oregon and then to us here in Eugene. And I'm going to start that with a definition. I'm a librarian. I love definitions of things. I love resources. The first part is, when we say book challenge, what do we mean? A challenge is a request to remove a material. A book banning is actually the removal of that item. We consider that censorship, removing an item from a collection. I'm not a mathematician, but I'm going to throw a bunch of numbers at you to what Bethany alluded at. The 2023 statistics for book challenges and bannings have come out. This year, we have 1,915 unique titles across the nation that were challenged. In 2021, that number was 729. We have 695 attempts to censor and remove materials in the nation. That's an increase of 20% over last year. The state of librarianship is one that is facing attack and is under challenge by multiple targeted organizations. You might think, well, I hear about this a lot in schools. school challenges, school bannings. The numbers this year actually show that 49% of all book challenges are coming at public libraries. That is an increase from last year where the number was 16%. So we are facing school challenges, but we are also facing challenges in our public libraries and institutions across the nation. Who is filing these challenges, you might ask? You may have heard the really interesting statistic that of all of the book challenges, 11 people are responsible for 90% of those challenges. 30% of the whole number of challenges that remain come from parents, 28% from patrons, 17% from political and religious organizations, 15% from boards and administrations, and then 3% come from librarians and teachers, and another 3% from elected officials, and then a miscellaneous percentage. One of the most notorious groups that do this is the Moms for Liberty group, which proceed to attack by doing multiple challenges. This isn't somebody coming in and challenging a single book. This is somebody walking into an institution and challenging 1,000 and saying all of these books are not fit for this institution. So what does that look like nationwide is that people are organizing and they're getting smarter. They're sitting on library boards, they're sitting on legislative boards. The Montana State Association was recently removed. They removed themselves from the American Library Association, not because Montana state librarians wanted to leave, but because Montana laws said that they would create a new council. That council could determine what happens in libraries. They decided not to be a part of the national organization. That has a huge impact on every librarian in that state. Laws that happen that are now criminally filing charges against librarians for being smut peddlers, choosing which books can and cannot go into libraries is being taken out of the hands of librarians across the nation so that we can have quote unquote safe books, not sexually explicit books. And ultimately what's happening is we're saying the quiet part out loud. Because what are the books that are being challenged and banned? Those are books by LGBTQIA folks, queer folks, people of color. The top 10 books that were challenged this year that made up this robust list that we celebrate every year for Banned Books Week, almost every single one of those books was written by a person of color or a queer person. We're no longer hiding what we're saying, which is these lifestyles are not to be talked about. They are not to be shared. They should be hidden in a separate section of the library where nobody can find them, behind a desk. And more importantly, maybe you just shouldn't purchase them. There's a study by the First Book Research Institution, and it's talking about the positive academic impacts of diverse books. They say making diverse books the focus of censors and book banners stand in the way of educational equity, and it stands in opposition of increasing reading interest and proficiency. We would rather choose what you read, but really we'd rather you not read. And that is just really impactful. I'm going to read another series of percentages. 53% of school-age children are kids of color. And 68% of fourth graders are not proficient at reading. That statistic is higher when you include kids of color. Specifically, 80% of Black, Native, and Latino children read below the reading level. And then when we target books that show those kids themselves reflected in literature, where it shows a trans kid what life could be like, when it shows, like me, a brown queer woman who's never seen myself reflected in literature when I was a child, we say those books aren't for you. When kids see themselves reflected in literature, when they resonate with a book, be that the silliness of Dogman or the impactfulness of a book like George, we say you cannot do that, you must do this. We are erasing their identity and their ability to read. I really want to understate, and really this is the part of restricting a young person's access to materials It doesn't protect them, which is often the thing that people say, we are protecting you. We are protecting youth. We are not just protecting my child, I am protecting all of these children. I'm not just choosing what's best for me, but I'm choosing what's best for you. When we remove books and literature from children, we are not protecting them from life's complex and challenging issues. That's still going to happen. Books are actually a way to understand those challenging and complex issues. I've been a librarian for 30 years. And I would say this is anecdotal, but I would say almost every librarian you bump in will tell you, and you may have seen it with your own kids, when a book is too scary, a kid puts it down. Oh, this book is too scary. No, mama, no, I'm not reading this one. Oh, too scary, too scary. Kids have an amazing ability to censor what they don't understand or what they can't read. They say, no, maybe later. That same kid comes back to that book a little bit later and goes, oh, I can't believe this book was scary. I can't believe I didn't want to read this. Because they change, but they're cognizant of that. So whilst we are saying the quiet part out loud nationally, what does that mean for us here in Oregon? You might say, we live in a safe blue state, right? That's the theme of our presentation today. I mentioned the book formerly known as George, written by Alex Gino. It now goes by a different title. It's called Melissa's Story. In 2018, anybody know what the OBOB books are, the Oregon Battle of the Books? Trust me, everybody in this room nodded. Everyone knows about the Oregon Battle of the Books. Somehow you have probably been dragged into it. It's a competition where kids across the state, per their grade range, answer really fun questions about books. They get very excited about it. In 2018, George, now Melissa's Story, written by Alex Gino, about a child. It's written through the perspective of this child figuring out their life, was an OBOB book. At the time, nobody complained that it was an OBOB book. It made it onto all the lists. Those books, then when it made the list, caused an uproar. People didn't want to know about children who might identify as trans. We can't teach children that. It made such an uproar, districts pulled themselves out of OBOB competitions. It made the national list because of Oregon of banned books. It was the #1 book in 2019 because of Oregon. So when you say this can't affect my state, it's like, well, actually, we were the cause of the #1 banned book because of that. You might say, okay, that's a whole state. How does this doesn't affect us here in Eugene? It does. The Eugene Public Library has seen an increase in challenges for material removal. It happens anywhere because any person, this is the freedom we have, you can say, I don't think this book belongs. And what we say is, actually, we purchased this book for a reason, because people should see themselves reflected in the literature. It is up to each individual to choose what they want to read. It is not for you to choose what somebody else can and cannot read. That could be your neighbor who files the challenge. That could be anybody else that you know. It happens within our own city. And so the theme of what you've seen is, as these things happen, there are things that will go undocumented. I read you a lot of numbers. Nationwide, librarians are being criminalized. They're worried. Silent censorship doesn't get reported. So what happens as all of these challenges come in, as people start to take an assault, not on the books, but on the people who write them, a librarian in your local library may say, I don't want to deal with it. I'm just not going to buy this book. I'd rather save myself all of the hassle buying this book will cause. And that silent censorship is how folks win. It's how that you don't have materials within your library. And so as we talk about it, how can you be proactive? Take an active interest in your library board, your school board. Be educated. Sign up for the American Library Association's Unite Against Book Bans. Find out what's going nationally and how that may impact you locally. Take a proactive stance to understanding how folks are getting organized, sitting on boards, because they may one day sit on your library board. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, Bethany, and Garrett. We'll begin our question and answer in just a moment, but first I'd like to thank the business and in-kind sponsors whose support helps to make City Club possible. Thank you to our gold sponsors, Network Charter School, Hirschner Hunter LLC, and Evans, Elder, Brown, and Subert. Thank you also to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Alpha IT, Dotson's Photography, the Ninkazi Better Living Room, and Claim 52. Also, a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs Monday nights at 7 p.m. For those listening at home right now, your household is one of several thousand turning into City Club on KLCC. We love that you are here. You can also find recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. We'll be right back with question and answer. Thank you.
Yeah. That's right. Okay, we have a microphone? Okay, we're now going to come back to the question and answer period of the program. If you have a question, please come up here and ask it. The only thing I will say about the presentations, in addition to how wonderful they were, was it's a lot worse than I thought. Andrew?
Thank you all again so much. My question has to do with the state of respect for civil liberties nationwide. We've seen polling recently by Pew and others that suggests that more younger Americans think that free speech should be curtailed in favor of other American values. And I'd love to hear what you think about those polls, and in particular, whether you think there are problems related to the curtailment of civil liberties across the political spectrum. We certainly heard about them from the conservative side, but if you see any challenges from the left of the spectrum as well. Thanks.
Oh, fun. Why didn't we give it to the law guy?
Give it to the law guy.
The law guy.
Oh,
I mean, I have thoughts, but I want these smart ones first, so I can give it to them.
tell me the question again. I was so relieved to not get asked it.
So, two-part question. One, we've seen evidence that younger Americans think that free speech should be curtailed in certain situations to protect other values. Does that tell us something about the future of civil liberties in America? And are there threats to civil liberties coming from the left of the spectrum politically, as you've detailed those coming from the conservative side? Thanks.
You know, it certainly, a certain level of intolerance is spread across the spectrum. And I, as an academic, I can tell you, for example, that I no longer video my classes. Not so much to defend myself against ending up on the internet or, one of these far-right websites, although it does do that, but because my students should be allowed to say what they think about these very contentious constitutional issues without worrying that 5 years from now it'll be played to an employer or something else. And of course, that's true across the board. I mean, internet outrage is something that has no particular home on the left or the right. It happens. It's a very disturbing social phenomenon. I do think that a couple of things. One is debates about the limits of free speech are very healthy because free speech is not a self-defining concept. At the margins, we're always balancing harms versus help. And, the discussion of hate speech is a classic example of that. How much harm is this speech being doing, and does our legal system take adequate attention of that harm? I will say that the challenge to free speech that is most salient because it is so well funded is coming from the right. That it is organized, it is nationwide, and it is causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. I do think we should engage our students in discussions of what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And I can tell you that whenever we have a conservative speaker at the U of O, I always make sure to go so my students, at least to model for them, that we have all points of view here. And I'm very proud that we've not had a disruption there. But as I say, the thing that alarms me is, as in the discussion about library challenges, is these well-funded groups that are getting money from we don't know where to carry out a very particular agenda and silence certain people. So I hope that addresses your question.
That's why I wanted you to go first. I find when I hear the question, it reminds me a little bit of, you always hear that poll question, what percentage of Americans think the country is going in the wrong direction? Both myself and an evangelical minister from deep South Alabama would both say, I think it's going the wrong direction. And that tells you absolutely nothing. And I wonder when people answer this question, where they are coming from. Because I think most I find most Americans' understanding of the First Amendment and the right to free speech to be fundamentally lacking. I mean, anytime anybody says something, they're like, I cannot believe they got fired for saying that. That violates the First Amendment. No, it doesn't. And yet, if you were to ask them about the First Amendment, they absolutely have an opinion. I think the other thing is that what I think that may also reflect, and I will admit that I don't know that I'm the First Amendment absolutist that I used to be, and I guess that is because I feel like, and it doesn't mean I want to dump it, but the ability to weaponize free speech as a means of hate and oppression seems to be accelerating and getting easier. And so, I wonder if you're somebody who's on Facebook who has watched as a transgender person, I can tell you this, that people will say hateful, horrible things, things that are statistically wrong, factually lies, they engage in hate, and yet that doesn't violate Facebook's terms of service. And then somebody gets kicked off because they, tell a neo-Nazi to go, dance in traffic and have a good time, and they get kicked off because, well, that's not nice. If you were to ask those people what they feel like should be limits on speech, again, is that the First Amendment? No, but it may color the way they view the issue. I'm on the national board of the Association of LGBTQ+ journalists, and it's always been our position that we do not take a position on the opinion pieces run by journalism outlets. So we're not going to take the New York Times to task or the Boston Globe or whoever for writing something that is anti-LGBT. And I happen to agree with that stance. Our goal is to combat inappropriate ethical practices and that kind of thing. But where do you draw the line? I think if you had said 10 years ago that it was going to be perfectly acceptable on a mass media network to advocate the elimination and the extinction of another group of human beings, we would have said, well, that never happens, so we don't need to draw that line because no one's ever going to get to it. When it comes to transgender lives, we have gone up to it, vaulted over it, and kept sprinting, and yet the policy of my organization is we don't take a stand on opinions, and I'm becoming an increasingly vocal advocate on our board that I'm sorry, there are some opinions that are so heinous that no, they are not protected within the bounds of this organization's ethical practices. Again, am I in favor of limiting their right to speak? No. But if you're asking me about the just unfettered goodness of the First Amendment, I'm not quite as sold as I used to be.
Angela, do you have anything to add?
I mean, they said it really well. I think I work a lot with youth, and I think to what Bethany said is true, is they see the First Amendment weaponized, and it makes it hard to care, right? The First Amendment's not the First Amendment with, you can say what you want, but not without consequences. And I think it's the consequences part, if you're in a public building or in a movie theater and you yell fire, they would say, well, that's your First Amendment right. And I think, to Bethany's point, that's a misunderstanding. And so youth across the nation, I think how they interact with that is they see weaponized, they see hate. And my hope is, as the generations move forward, is they say, we don't want to be a part of that. That's not as important a value as ensuring my right to an existence.
Would you hand the mic to that gentleman over there who has a question?
Thank you very much. Just two yes or no questions, quite quick. But one, doesn't everybody have a set of, it's hard to say exactly what to call it in general, but censorship, where they say some censorship is good and necessary, and we have to have it to protect people. And then they say other censorship is abominable, and we can't allow it. But there's no rules for deciding what goes in and what goes out. To depend from...
Yeah.
Let me just tuck the other question in quick, and so Dan can shut up. And this hideous, systematic attack on freedom of speech And every other part of the First Amendment, and for that matter, the Second Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and many other amendments, isn't it just a fascist movement? And we have to learn to fight against fascism like the Black Panther Party did so heroically for decades and has now been forgotten over. So there's a question. Thank you.
I'm going to take the first one, and I'm going to give you some examples in library world, because that's the realm that I live in. Yes, sometimes librarian censorship is good. Please don't take that soundbite out of context, but that is to say two different examples. We as librarians don't always get everything right. We try to be very smart. We use a lot of sources that we have vetted that nationally, like a book review, Library Journal, School Library Journal, Kirkus, and we try to make the right decisions about where materials go. Sometimes we don't get that right. We make a mistake. It goes in the wrong section. Somebody says, this book doesn't belong in this section, and we're like, oh my gosh, you're right. This is obviously an adult graphic novel. We accidentally put it in the teen section. We're moving it. Thank you. So that's one part. The second part, certainly around whether or not it's good or bad, is the navigational line that libraries have to face in when they decide to purchase a material. Right now, there is not enough scientific evidence to prove that the Earth is flat. Therefore, we are not purchasing a lot of books about the Earth being flat because we don't find that there is enough evidence of the Earth being flat, and so we haven't purchased flat earther books. And so that's also a reasoning around censorship, is why you're like, I can't find a flat earther book at my library. Well, at this point in time, we just don't feel like that's a book that has content that is what we need to add to the collection, and so that's a form of censorship. We've chosen not to purchase that book. Absolutely. So that's how, yes, sometimes censorship can play out because you do have to put some guidelines. We don't purchase every material. We do like to have vetted books within our collection, but one could call that censorship.
Angela, could I interrupt and ask, what is the process for making the decision we're not buying flat earth books today?
Absolutely. We, the library and most libraries stand behind a collection development policy where we put guidelines for how we purchase books. That could mean that the item has vetted sources. That doesn't mean we're going on to Amazon and a book that has 3 reviews and therefore has 5 stars we're purchasing. It means we're making thoughtful decisions about each item that's added to the collection and where the community interest and value is. We do understand that sometimes that doesn't allow for a lot of equity in the policy because a local author won't have a lot of reviews in School Library Journal, so we may not add that book. So our team is always looking at it from an equity perspective of how we balance that as well.
Okay, thank you. Continue with the answers.
I'll just say real quickly as to your last question, is this fascism? You know, certainly it has characteristics that it shares a lot of characteristics with fascism, but I resist that label for the following reason. Fascism is a foreign phenomenon. We Americans are anti-fascist. We all are taught that in school. We need to own this problem as an American problem and understand that the United States was the first country in Western history to erect a multiracial democratic republic with free elections. We are also the first country to destroy that democracy, which is what happened in the South, was replaced with a racial dictatorship where elections were largely false. That lasted 75 years. So we need to understand this. We are fighting ourselves. You know, there's a lot of talk in Washington about, oh, Viktor Orban, Putin is having all this. You know, if those people are having influence, it's because they speak to something in our society that we need to confront.
And again, this is one of these things that I've changed a great deal, is I was brought up looking at the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Constitution as kind of coming from this objective, neutral position, and that our system of government and that our amendments and all of those were designed to maintain a system that had an innate objectivity. And having spent most of my life in journalism, I was trained, you know, that there's objectivity. that there is such a thing as, the middle of the road. And one of the things that I came to realize while at the University of Oregon, both learning as a PhD, but also teaching journalism to students of color who were nice enough to raise their hand and say, that's not right. And this idea that objectivity is rooted in an objective truth, an objective fact. And what I kind of came to realize was that the system that we have in journalism is not based on an objective set of facts. It is based on the established consensus of one group of people. And the fact that that one group of people that forever controlled media was cisgender straight white guys, it became objective simply because the vast majority of the people that had the power decreed it to be so.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
And
So,
so
Hand
yeah.
it back to Andrew. Hate to interrupt you.
And I now look at the Constitution as the same way. Yes, the University of Oregon made me a flaming liberal. That may shock you, I don't know.
Further becoming a flaming radical, like the Black Panther Party was, because they changed the country. They stopped fascism.
Maybe the university will add that to their litany at the beginning of these presentations. Live ethically, flaming liberalism, but it's not an actual piece of advice. Gonna get in trouble at home. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. This has been our September 29th, 2023 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. Please join me in thanking our panelists. We are off next week in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day, but please join us the following Friday, October 13th, as we explore how open space and the outdoors is an economic driver in our communities. Take care and see you in a few weeks.